regular meeting of the Recreation Parks Commission to order. Would everyone please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Here, help me up. Look, Max. Doesn't it look just like an angel?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. All right, let's see here. Monse, roll call, please.
Yes, Commissioner Kelly Watson.
Present.
Commissioner Julie Stolnak.
Present.
Commissioner Dave Lubes.
Present.
Vice Chairperson Lee Davis.
Present.
And Chairperson Bob Moda.
I am here. Thank you. Presentations tonight, Melissa.
And there are none.
There are
No
none.
presentations on the agenda tonight.
Okay, thank you. Public communications next, related to commission business only. And that is within a subject matter under the jurisdiction of the commission. Monse, there are, I'm told, some public communications that you're going to read.
Correct. Thank you for including the teen girl space in your assessment. Your consideration is very important to current and future teen girls in El Segundo. I believe this project is necessary because all of El Segundo's current outdoor spaces for teens are almost exclusively used by boys, courts, fields, skate parks, etc. While girls could and are allowed to use these spaces, they report not feeling comfortable in them. They feel judged, sometimes harassed, and cannot simply relax and connect with friends. Teen girls love swings, but when they play on the playgrounds designed for younger kids, they are seen as too big invaders. Playgrounds are meant for young children, but where are these teen girls supposed to hang that is fun, safe, and age appropriate? While designed with girls in mind, the space will serve all of the teens in our community. Unstructured time in nature is vital to mental health in teens. And that was by Angie. Thank you, Rec and Park, for including a teen girl space in your recreation park assessment. I can attest that this park space project designed specifically for adolescent girls is needed. Multiple times I have witnessed teenage girls using the swings in Rec Park fenced in tot lot meant for toddlers. These girls apparently had nowhere more appealing to hang out in all of Rec Park. So I encourage the commission and city council to remember their teenage constituents when redesigning Rec Park, particularly the female half of the teenage demographic who may have been forgotten in the past, and consider adding some modern lounge-like elements such as shadings, seating suited for conversation, and a variety of teen-approved swings as pitched by Julie Hollop to create fun, dedicated outdoor spaces that will better serve the teenage youth in our community. Thank you, Jane. I'm writing to thank Rec and Park for including the teen girl space in their assessment and to stress that this project is necessary. All of our current outdoor spaces for teens are almost exclusively used by boys, courts, fields, skate parks, etc. While the girls could use these spaces, they report not feeling comfortable in them. They feel judged, sometimes harassed, and cannot simply relax and connect with friends. While designed with girls in mind, the teen space will serve all of the teens in our community. Unstructured time in nature is vital to mental health in teens. Thanks, Julie Hollop. That concludes my comments.
Okay, thank you. Are there anyone else for public communications? I'm seeing none. We'll close public communications. Consent calendar. Approval of the minutes of the Recreation and Parks Commission special meeting of October 13th, 2021. There's one thing that it was my mistake in that meeting, and it was the vote. It was a vote on the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting. It was 4-0-1. There was one abstention. So I'm just, it's not a big change, but that is the only change that I saw. And
I had that.
Under the, which part of the minutes?
it was the approval of the minutes on and the consent calendar. It says carried 4-0, was 4-0-1.
Right, I had that change also. I was the one.
So with that, I would move approval.
Lee Davis, I'll second it.
Make sure, can everyone hear me? Make sure you include it as amended, so the change is included in your approval.
Okay, thank you. Monte, will need a voice vote, please.
Right. Commissioner Kelly Watson,
Approved as amended.
Commissioner Julie Stolnak,
Same, approved as amended.
Commissioner Dave Lubes,
Approved as amended.
Vice Chairperson Lee Davis,
Approved.
and Chairperson Bob Mota.
Approve as amended, thank you. Okay, there's no unfinished business. New business, Recreation and Parks Needs Assessment by RJM Design Group. This is the recommendation is to receive and file, and there were supporting documents. Melissa?
Thank you so much, Chair Boda, and good evening to the Rec and Parks Commission and all of the El Segundo community members watching tonight's meeting. We're very appreciative of the opportunity to take another step in the Recreation Park Needs Assessment process, as our goal continues to be to develop a practical, comprehensive, data-driven plan of action for meeting the immediate, short-term, and long-range needs for facilities and programs in Recreation Park. As a reminder, City Council directed staff to conduct this needs assessment in April of 2021 to obtain a more comprehensive understanding of community needs with respect to all Recreation Park facilities and operations, as well as facility conditions, prior to spending a large amount of money renovating the city's standalone teen center. City Council is expecting a needs assessment update at their upcoming meeting on November 16th. That will also be one more step in the process, as council direction, funding allocations, additional community engagement and design will all be needed prior to implementation of the plan or portions of the plan. Tonight's presentation by RGM Design Group consultant Zachary will include summary information about their analysis and professional recommendations, and there will be time after the presentation for both questions and input. Chair Moda and I spoke before the meeting that this effort is challenging, as Rec Park is absolutely beloved by the El Segundo community, and a lot of residents' strong feelings are based on decades of use and memories, as well as the park's history and unique character. At the same time, most of the buildings were built in the 1960s or 1980, and there are significant facility, accessibility, and financial concerns, as well as opportunities for enhancements. So together, we need to find a way forward. Chair Moda, do you have anything that you want to add before Zachary begins his presentation?
The only thing is, we really need to look at this assessment with open eyes and open mind. And let's see where it goes, and let's give some good feedback to RJM, and let's see where this goes.
Thank you so much. So welcome, Zachary. Please feel free to begin and share your screen whenever you're ready.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be invited here tonight to participate. And Melissa, you nailed it on the head, is what we're doing here as part of the Recreation Park Needs Assessment. And I will echo, this is a very beloved park by the community. We heard a tremendous amount of input from the community. We got some excellent data in, and I'm going to go through all of the information we collected tonight. I'm going to try and be as succinct as possible. And we go through the numerous documents that we've assessed, the facilities, conditions, as well as all the community input. So we're going to hear a lot of information tonight, but we're going to land at the end of the recommendations. And three specific categories: the immediate, the short-term, and the long-term recommendations. So we can conclude on that note tonight. With that, let me share my screen here. Everybody should be able to see the screen, I'm assuming, yes? Wonderful. So, as Melissa had mentioned earlier, the purpose really is to look at the future of Recreation Park, and we did it with a very clear, open mind and really data-driven analysis. And what I mean by that is data-driven from what does the community want? What are the needs in the community? We looked at community needs from a citywide standpoint. We took an assessment from the entire community to assess what are some of those recreation needs within the community. And then we took that and we started to dial in and synthesize everything down to realistic recommendations that can be achieved in a short term, an immediate term, and then a long term recommendation timeline. So we're going to see a couple sets of data tonight. One, the professional analysis, where we looked at all of the facility informations, the buildings, the irrigation, everything that we saw out on site, including with walks with staff, multiple site visits. And then we're going to hear the community voice. We're going to see all the information we collected across multiple outreach attempts, and then we're going to synthesize those down into those three recommendation categories from immediate 0 to 5 years, short term, 5 to 10 years, and then long term, 10 to 15-year outlooks. What we do when we start any assessment is we start with the Esri Tapestry demographic information. Now, this isn't just demographics, but it's also geographic information as well too. We look at where the community is, whom the community is, and it starts with age ranges of the community, change in population over time, housing, and what we see here, and just some of the initial patterns is the largest percentage of the population, 44%, is actually between the ages of 35 to 64. We also see that there was significant growth among the age ranges of 65 to 79 years old, ranging from 52 to 63% increases. We've also seen, in terms of housing unit growth, it's relatively low compared to the county average of 1.2% compared to 3.7%. And most importantly is when we do our data collection, we look at the geographics, and you can see here in the upper west end of El Segundo is really where all those communities exist, all the residential areas within the city of El Segundo. So when we collect our data, we geocode all of the information to make sure we're getting a representation of this community makeup throughout the process. As I mentioned, community outreach was the most important component of the entire process. Utilizing social media channels and crowdsourcing methodologies, we created a two-way dialogue with community. We had a 24/7 project portal where the community could see updates about the project, learn information about the project, find out what the assessment was on, and then we collected multimodal survey responses, which is a telephone survey response, online surveys, as well as 2 online surveys, stakeholder surveys, as well as feedback surveys. At any point in time, the community, even up to tonight, can go on the project website and there's a feedback button live on there. Anyone can click on that feedback button and share immediate feedback button with the design team. So far, overall, you can see these numbers. We've collected over 300 multimodal surveys. That's the statistically valid information. I'll go through that tonight, as well as survey 1 and 2 with 588 surveys collected in survey 1, 212 surveys collected in survey 2, and then just the project website alone. We look at that, how many times people viewed it. Almost 3,000 project website views. So the community is checking back in, they're watching the website, they're watching the project unfold, and to date, we've received 87 feedback surveys, and that was up to this morning, actually, as we went through. And those feedback surveys, a note on that, they're open-ended. We accept any information the community wants to give us throughout the process. Starting with one of the first modes of outreach really is that multimodal survey. Sets the tone for what we see, what the community sees on a citywide basis. As I mentioned before, we collected 300 completed surveys. It was conducted from July 12th to July 22nd in both English and Spanish. It was a citywide analysis that identified different participation rates as well as satisfaction with recreation elements. And it touched on citywide topics, programming topics, park-specific topics, as well as facility-specific topics. And I'll go through just a few of those now. When we asked citywide data, citywide information, we asked the question whether the community approved or disapproved of the job of El Segundo Community Services Department is doing. And what we found is overall, 76% of the participants approve of the recreation programs and activities and events and planning, which is a high number. That shows that the community is really appreciative and is in line with the job that Parks and Recreation is doing right now. We also asked the question, how they rate the overall facilities within El Segundo. And this is another really good number. Something to be quite proud of is 82% of the participants identify the facilities as good or excellent. One of the last questions we asked on the citywide data was, does the participants, do they approve or disapprove of the maintenance of all the city parks, trees, and facilities that the Public Works is doing? And what we found here is 83% of the participants approved of the job that Public Works is doing through the maintenance of all the city parks and facilities. So this is good information to start with as we dial into some of the specific elements of the community. And as we get tighter and tighter into these questions, we'll see some more detailed elements specific to Recreation Park come to light. The next set, we started to ask questions about the programs. And when we asked about the programs, we asked them in the standpoint of, in a typical year when there is not a pandemic, we're trying to assess the condition of people's program usage and program preference of the overall elements, whether they had a strong satisfaction or not prior to the pandemic. So we've preferenced every question with, in a typical year when there is not a pandemic. The first question we asked was, how many members of you and your household participated in recreation programs in El Segundo? And you see here we have a high participation rate, 59% of participants from the survey participating several times a year. The next question we asked was, how did they rate those overall quality of the programs? And 84% came back saying that they rated them good or excellent, which really shows us that there's high participation in those program uses and they're very well rated. They're well enjoyed and loved by the community. The next question we asked was, what do you or other members of your household do when visiting a recreation facility in El Segundo? And what we heard is participants enjoy passive amenities. Passive recreation is the most common park activity when people visited a park. We also heard other elements such as active self-led, organized class and activities. However, that enjoyment of just park elements, turf and trees, natural open space came in highest as those passive recreation components. Moving further into some park-specific elements, we wanted to narrow in the focus of the survey at this point, and we asked two specific questions. One of them, we asked open-ended, how often do you or your members of your household use facilities or visit or have visited Recreation Park? And what we found is that 31% of the participants have visited Recreation Park more than once a week. Additionally, some more data on that is 22% said 3 to 4 times a month, 14% said 1 to 2 times a month, 15% said several times a year. In fact, one of the smaller numbers, only 9% of the participants had said they never visited Recreation Park. This is strong information because now I know we've captured a significant portion of the population who has identified with Recreation Park and will give us good information back on it. We also asked open-endedly, what is the name of a park or recreation facility people use the most and why? And what we found was 50% of the participants of the survey use Recreation Park the most within the community. So clearly it is very well loved park, it is very heavily used park. In fact, when we go through all of the open-ended answers, that percentage is closer to 60% because we had a number of people identify that they go to the Jocelyn Center, the Senior Center, the Teen Center, the skate park, or various fields at that park, which were all Recreation Park specific. Diving into some of the facility specific questions, we started to notice a trend here. And this was something that we flagged for continued analysis as we move through our surveys. Is when we asked about people's participation, we asked how often people in the household have visited the Jocelyn Center, visited the Gordon Clubhouse, as well as the Teen Center. And what we found was, interestingly, that 64% of the participants of this survey never used the Jocelyn Center. 56% of the participants of the survey never visited the Gordon Clubhouse. And then 69% has identified that they never visited the teen center. With such high usage and identification of Recreation Park, we started to look at this as a question of why. Why are people not utilizing these centers? And what does this information mean to us as we move through the surveys? Of course, we also asked the question from a citywide level, what are one facility and one program participants would like to see throughout the city? Now, being though this first part of the process was citywide, you'll see some of the elements in here, such as the plunge or swimming pool or swim lessons. Those came up as elements within a citywide analysis when we asked people the open-ended question. But we also see some possible recreation park opportunities here, such as improved bathrooms, tennis, pickleball courts, picnic, shade, green space, youth sports and programs, teen clubs, tennis, and adult leagues. Several of these elements came up. And what we do as we go throughout this process is we track the common threads. We identify elements that are reoccurring through each of these elements that we do throughout the process, and we flag those for continued review and identification. As we move through, the next outreach attempt was in August 2nd through August 16th, and this was survey 1. It started with asking the likes and dislikes of Recreation Park. And we also asked followed up information on what buildings do you visit and why. This started to set the tone to dive a little bit deeper into some of those building usage patterns that we saw in the multimodal survey. Overall, we had 588 completed surveys, which is a tremendous amount for this effort as we went out. And we also look at the geographic distribution coverage. As I mentioned earlier, you can see all of the coverage of the responses that we got were geocoded into the northwest region of El Segundo, right where all the community housing and residential areas are. Starting with the visitation rates, we asked participants how often they had visited the recreation park. And what we see there in the upper right-hand corner, same thing, 47% visit recreation park more than once a week, very high participation numbers. And then we also see that 27% visited recreation park 3 or 4 times a month. What that tells us is what we're getting is a lot of good park users who are going to give us very good information specific to the recreation park. But we also asked about utilization of the Jocelyn Center, the Teen Center, and the Clubhouse. And we saw again a low utilization of those buildings within the survey. We also asked the question, what are some of the new or improved amenities people would like to see at Recreation Park? And you can see here on the left-hand side some of the responses that we received. I'll read through just a couple of them. Restrooms, playgrounds, picnic areas, walking paths, a community garden, clubhouse improvements, teen center, tennis, and pickleball improvements. So again, we're starting to see those common threads with, we hear information on the multimodal phone survey as well as survey 1, but more importantly, we're also seeing that building usage common element come through too. So we start to pay really specific attention to that. And when we ask the question of why, those people who said they don't visit those the centers or facilities, Jocelyn Center, Teen Center, Clubhouse, we asked why. And what we heard in terms of the Jocelyn Center were that they were not a senior. They were not interested, they didn't know about it, there was no reason, or they were too busy. In terms of the Teen Center, we heard that they were not a teen, they were not interested, there was no need, and it feels exclusive to certain groups. In terms of the Clubhouse, we heard, again, not interested, not sure what's there, no need, no reason, and they didn't know what it was. So we kept that information and we continue to monitor it as we move through the process. Survey 2 was conducted in September 1st through September 15th, and we collected 212 surveys as part of this one. It also included a supplemental video to share information with the community to inform them on potential costs of the improvements that were necessary, identified in some of the building improvements and the analysis that we conducted in part of the facility condition assessment. In this survey, we asked people to prioritize a list of programs that we heard the most and facilities based on their immediate, short-term, and long-term views. And again, you can see on the right-hand side the geographic distribution of those surveys. We had a nice distribution across the residential community of El Segundo. Many of those elements that we heard, such as immediate improvements, included picnic areas, playgrounds, restrooms, teen center, walking paths, some immediate short-term improvements, such as the sports field improvements, pickleball and tennis improvements, as well as other improvements were categorized by the community, such as basketball courts. Most importantly, during this survey, we probed a little bit more on the usage of those facilities. Based on what we'd heard, we'd asked the participants when they would prefer to see a new multi-generational facility. And this was based on the informational video we sent out, as well as all the research we had heard up to date. And what we found was 90% of the participants indicated an immediate short-term or long-term preference. Only 10% of the participants of this survey indicated that they did not want a new multi-generational center and would prefer to keep updating some of those older facilities. Now, what we do with all of the community information that we've gathered and collected is we identify it on a spreadsheet in a matrix, what we call a heat map. We start to identify everything we've heard as terms of how often did a certain amenity come up, how many outreach modes did that amenity come up, and the more often an amenity comes up in multiple modes, it starts to identify as an indicator that that amenity will have a greater impact on a larger segment of the community. You can see here, this is just a sample. As we get information in, we record everything we hear on the left-hand side. And then under the various outreach opportunities, whether it was an online survey, whether it was the stakeholder surveys that we sent out or the multimodal survey, we identified how many times we heard it and in what mode. So that way we could accurately identify the frequent, apparent, and identified needs, which you see here now. Those frequent needs came up quite a bit, as well as the apparent needs coming up in 2 modes, and then the identified need coming up in only 1 mode. Now, every one of these gets recorded and weighted equally as we move through the process because it is the community voice. We want to make sure we look at everything the community has sent out to us and provided us feedback on, but we also compare that with our professional analysis. So you can see here from this list, I won't read the entire thing, but we had a number of different elements come up that did include common threads throughout the entire process: the basketball courts, baseball, little league, softball improvements, open space landscaping, picnic areas, playgrounds, restroom, teen center improvements, walking paths, all the way to the far right-hand side of the area down at the bottom. Some of those areas such as soccer fields. We heard also heard teen girl area improvements. We heard that again tonight. Everything all the way through trash cans. We record all of the information throughout the entire process, so that way no voice is left out of it. What we do at the end now is we take our own professional assessment. We combine all that community data and we go out to the site and we conducted a detailed site analysis from the standpoint of irrigation assessments, building facility condition assessments, as well as facility general site assessments. And so here's some of our findings. When we go through them, we categorize them into 3 categories specifically: non-phase restricted improvements, elements that we found that can be done at any point in time, and then primary phase improvements, improvements that should be done prior to some of the other larger improvements, which we identified as secondary phase improvements. This way, as we start to implement some of these changes or recommendations in Recreation Park, you're not going to be ripping out something you just put in order to facilitate another recommendation. This allows us to go through a very linear process in terms of implementing changes to Recreation Park. So, as I mentioned earlier too, we conducted site visits with staff. We conducted site visits with various building professionals, architects, as well as landscape architects and irrigation engineers to assess all of the elements, everything from drainage patterns to lights, to buildings, equipment, walkways, irrigation. They were all reviewed through our design team as well as staff involvement. Here are some of those recommendations that we've developed. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the non-phase restricted improvements are on the left. And what I've done on this list is I've highlighted elements that we also heard in the community voice section, such as restrooms, walking paths, baseball, little league, softball field, sport court lighting, basketball courts, dog area, pickleball courts, continuing on that list there on the left-hand side. Those are improvements that can be picked up anytime as we move through the next 15 years of Recreation Park. However, we did identify some other elements on the right-hand side. These are what we've identified as primary phased improvements, which means they should be addressed prior to any other major improvements within Recreation Park. Some of those being the Gordon Mead Clubhouse, a new multi-generational community center building, which we also mentioned on the online survey too, teen center improvements, Jocelyn Center improvements, as well as the elevator, the checkout building, and outreach building. The secondary and phased improvements really focus on elements that can be improved after those primary improvements, such as the skate spot, picnic areas, playgrounds, walking paths, fitness stations, tennis courts, pickleball courts, mural art, table tennis, multi-use flex programming space, teen girl space, electric vehicle charging stations, sand volleyball, beach tennis courts, volleyball courts, as well as batting cages and soccer fields. Again, highlighting elements that we saw out there in the park, as well as heard from the community to identify various elements. The last element we have here in terms of professional recommendations really are based on putting everything together. When we see everything come together in terms of the community voice, as well as our design professional improvements and the site itself, we look at different improvements that might be based on common configurations for newly designed parks today, such as restrooms. Based on all the information and the movements that we're proposing on this plan, there will be a need for an additional restroom after some of the other facilities are renovated. And this, let me clarify, is this restroom, there's already an existing restroom in its place. We'd simply be remodeling that restroom over by the ball fields in the upper east end. A team staging area for additional seating, shade, park amenities, picnic shelter areas over by the tennis courts, as well as consideration for synthetic turf. Looking at the level of play on the fields, we didn't do a specific sports league survey analysis on this. However, based on our review of the site, as well as the programming, we see heavy utilization of these fields. And if the city were to consider implementing or increasing those level of plays, we would look at better drainage analysis, such as synthetic turf, to replace the Little League softball and ball fields with a synthetic turf overlay, as well as plaza and hardscape expansion, making sure that as we do design the park and future elements, we start to look at some of those flexible programming spaces and staging areas that the city can utilize to have multiple programming elements throughout the rest of the lifespan of the park. Now, how we put it all together really starts to take what we've seen, what we've heard, as well as what we've seen in the facility assessments. And we've combined them to make short, immediate, and long-term recommendations. The immediate recommendations in the first 5 years, short-term recommendations in the next 5 to 10, and long-term recommendations in the next 10 to 15. And what we've shown here is looking at the restrooms, the walking paths, and the sports field maintenance upgrades immediately, putting in information in facilities that we can address right away within the existing infrastructure of the park to start to address some of these facilities and the deficiencies there. Looking at parking lighting, the dog area, lawn bowling area, park amenities, parking lot repairs, court storage areas, open space landscaping, as well as building facility required improvements that we identified in the facility condition assessment over the next 5 years. And here's another element too, is when we look at the buildings, we looked at them in terms of cost of the improvements, as well as lifespan. As Melissa had indicated earlier, a lot of these facilities were built in the 1960s. So these facilities are quite old and will require quite a bit of infrastructure improvements to maintain their operations. That doesn't mean a remodel, it means maintaining their existing operations. So we're looking in the first 5 years of continuing those maintenance elements, as well as some of the highlighted improvements here you can see also represent that community voice. So a lot of those elements we heard from the community are woven into this plan to make sure that their needs and wants are identified. And the next short-term phase, within 5 to 10 years, what we identified was really a new multi-generational community building here. And we look at this as the overall site being the benefits of scale economy. One facility rather than multiple facilities across the site. We also look at this when we go back across that program participation was strong at 59%. The ratings for the programs were high at 84%, yet the building usage was very low. It had a lot of low participation analysis throughout our surveys. When we had follow-up surveys, participants identified that they don't use certain facilities because there is a lack of interest or individual generational identification, such as I'm not a teen or I'm not a senior. In fact, the term senior is starting to be very loosely identified with much older generations, no longer the generation we typically identify it with. El Segundo was a very active outdoor community. We see that with the demographic trends from the very beginning of the presentation. the largest part of the population, 44%, meaning 35 to 64. And we see less association with that term senior. So with a very active community, very outdoor community, and communities looking for really that multi-generational space, not necessarily a identified senior teen space, but more of that community space, we're looking at a new multi-generational facility. And this is in line also with some of those facility condition improvements we identified. When we look at the cost of how much it will take over the next 15 years in terms of the cost of a new facility, those costs are almost equally balanced. So we look at what are we going to spend the money on? Is it better to spend the money on based on all the information we had for a new facility that will carry us through the next 40, 50 years, or continuing to spend money on some of those older facilities as we move through them? Additional elements in the 5 to 10 year plan included wayfinding signage, skate park, skate spot development, playgrounds, walking paths, fitness stations, mural art, paddle tennis, table tennis, and those multi-use flexible programming spaces. Finally, in the 10 to 15 year range, what we've identified after the new multi-generational center is online, programs and services as move over to it, we look at continuing development of the park, continuing development of the teen center building, leaving the teen center building there, and possibly repurposing the facility for other community programs, as well as other city programs and development. Looking at new tennis and pickleball courts after the checkout building is removed, expanding a new restroom on the east end of the park over by once the checkout building is removed too, that bathroom would go away and it would be relocated over to the east end and remodel that restroom facility there. And then there was also consideration for the alternative drainage and play surfaces that we mentioned earlier. All of these recommendations are keyed onto this master plan bubble diagram illustrative. So that way we can visually see and address each one of these elements as we move through it. Designed carefully so that there's a phasing and implementation method with each phase, such as the 0 to 5, 5 to 10, or the 10 to 15 year improvements. With this information, you're able to plan a path forward for a recreation park that is both in line with the community views as well as sound planning in terms of the age of the facilities and how much we're going to have to put into this facilities and probable maintenance improvements over the next 5, 10, 15 years. I really appreciate everybody's time. I know that was a long presentation with a lot of data. It's sometimes difficult to get it all in to try and show the amount of work that was done in it, but I do appreciate your time and I'd love to answer any questions you have.
Okay. So let's go around the room here and let's if we have some comments.
Can I ask a procedural question before we start comments?
Sure.
So the recommendation from staff is to receive and file. Does that mean that, are we supposed to give how far are we in the process of how deep are we supposed to go with our questions and comments right now? What is the expectation of the commission at this point?
Melissa?
So we would love your questions and input. We are not asking for a recommendation related to this current, report of where we are in the analysis, but you are welcome to go, as deep into the questions as you would like, Dave.
Okay. Dave, did you want to start?
Not really.
Okay. Anybody? Lee, I see it. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. Zachary, I had a couple of questions on it. I think it was on, slide 10, 12, hold on. Where you, the actual question came up, with the new multi-generational center in mind, were people actually asked if they wanted a multi-generational center or if they wanted to keep the old existing buildings? Or was that just an assumption that we're going multi-generational center?
So the actual question on that was, with the new multi-generational center in mind and the rising costs for the improvements of the older facilities, ADA building improvement costs, and low usage of the buildings, when would you prefer to see the city potentially invest in a new multi-generational center at Recreation Park? and remove the older facilities to make room for more outdoor recreation programming opportunities. The answers that were provided at that time in a multiple selection question was immediate need, add it in the next 0 to 5 years, add it in the next 5 to 10 years, add it in the next 10 to 15 years, or never. Keep updating the older facilities. So there was basically, at the end of the day, the option of, do you want a new facility center or not? And we heard some people said we wanted it sooner, immediate, short-term, or long-term. We actually heard 10% say we don't want it. Keep updating the older facilities.
Lee, can I jump in? Because I have a follow-up to that same exact one. I still don't get it, Zach. Where did the idea of a multi-generational facility come from? Did the video highlight how cool multi-generational, because I've never heard that term. This is the first time that's come up. And I'm wondering if that became a desire of the group of respondents, how they became aware of it as a possibility, other than that question.
So the multi-generational center really, when we conducted each of the outreach, and this was a really interesting point of it, because each one of those outreach modes that we conducted, the multimodal survey, we found high participation with some of the programs. With all the programs, we saw high approval ratings of the programs. But each time we started to address some of those facilities in any of the outreach modes, we heard that the participants were just simply not utilizing the facilities. And when we started to probe into the why participants aren't utilizing the facilities in a park that is heavily utilized by the community, it is heavily loved by the community, it is almost the primary spot for recreation that we see within the community in each one of our outreach modes, we started scratching our heads saying, why is this? What's wrong with these facilities? We asked the question of the community, why? And they identified some of those things as they didn't identify as a teen. They didn't identify as a senior. They weren't interested in going there. But we did hear elements from the community, such as we wanted to update the bathrooms. And when we look at those elements along the lines with the facility conditions, the building assessments of how much money we're going to have to start putting into these facilities, as well as the desire from the community to have teen center upgrades, restroom upgrades, various facility upgrades, we started to look and ask ourselves the question of, okay, if we're going to spend X amount of money to upgrade these facilities, we're going to have to really look at, do we want to keep these facilities, or is there a better way to support the community and maybe boost participation in these facilities themselves? Because right now they're not overwhelmingly utilized. How can we boost the utilization of these facilities? So that the design team came up with what we're seeing as a trend in a lot of communities is multi-generational facilities. Looking at multi-generational programming so everybody has an equitable space without identifying themselves as seniors, as teens, but a more community center focused building. When we looked at that, we said, all right, well, let's ask the community if they're in line with a new multi-generational center as being a recommendation. That's where that question came out of. But there was also a video that preceded that survey. And on that survey, we asked, did people see the video? We gave them an opportunity to look at the video, which outlined some of those costs of facilities, how much they're going to cost to maintain, and how much a new multi-generational center would be.
Okay, so, and again, I'm not pro or con multi-generational center. I'm just trying to understand where this is. So it sounds like, is it fair to say that this video promoted the idea of a multi-generational facility?
So as the design team, we launched the idea of the multi-generational facility with the video, but we did it in concert with the maintenance costs, because that's what led us to that determination of, we got to ask ourselves, really, is there a need for a multi-generational center, a new community buildings effectively in this? Now, it would be more expensive to replace all 3 buildings. So we looked at the idea of replacing 1 building. There was a study in the past that launched this, and it was something conducted many years ago. It didn't influence this process. It was background information, but we wanted to go to the community again and say, this is what we see coming through. This is what we've heard in terms of maintenance. We see in terms of maintenance. We, the design team, launched the multi-generational center idea to the community in that survey.
Okay, thanks, Lee. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you, Dave. what was the average age of the participant in the survey? Do you have that data? Or, and the reason why I ask is obviously if there were no teenagers, they didn't go to the teen center, and being mostly online, you know, a lot of our seniors don't necessarily get online to take surveys.
I do have some of that data for terms of such as the multimodal survey. We do collect a lot of the geographic information as well as the demographic information. And in terms of that, and what we found were males 58%, female 50%, ages 18 to 29, 15%, 30 to 39, 16%, 40 to 54, 29%, 55 to 64, 18%, 65 plus and over, 18%. We did have 1.7% prefer not to answer.
Fair enough. Okay. And then I think you answered it in your actual presentation, but the estimated cost of an MSC as opposed to going through the existing buildings, did you state it was about equal? Is that what you came up with, you know, on guesstimates or, you know, loose estimates?
Yes. So when we did our analysis, we looked at all the numbers in terms of what the facility condition assessment said needed to be replaced. And let me quantify replaced real specifically, as it's doorknob for doorknob. It's not a brand new remodel or redesign. It's keeping it running. So if an AC unit fails, it's replacement of an AC unit in kind. So it's not a new improvement that you would say, hey, we've remodeled this entire building. No, these were just maintenance costs going through. So we took that number based on what it would be for the next 5, 10, and 15-year increments. And then we looked at, with our architects, how much a new facility would cost based on the statistically valid data we have from the multimodal survey. We took the participation rates of each of those buildings, determined what it would need to be based on the participation of the people who are in fact utilizing the facilities. And then we combined those and came up with around a 10 to 15,000 square foot facility. We put an average cost on that. And those two numbers actually ended up very close, within $100,000 of each other. So we, the design team, said, we have to ask this question. We wouldn't be able to do our due diligence or a good service to our client if we didn't say, okay, you're going to end up paying this for all the older facilities. This is what a new facility would cost. We get you a much longer lifespan. We need to ask the community, are they interested in this new multi-generational facility? And as a modern park design, we saw that was the right way to go and launched that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And the last one's kind of just a detail where I was looking at some of the numbers and I thought it was interesting. I think it's on slide 11 or 11 sheet that I was given in my packet. It actually goes in and, you know, what facility projects, the multimodal survey, and at the top, what park and recreation facility projects would you most like to see in El Segundo? And I noticed that the top answer and the sixth answer, one was remodel the plunge and the other was swimming pool and water aerobics. And I was wondering why they weren't put together for 12%, or is there truly a difference between the two?
So good point. I'm glad you caught those. Two things here is the multimodal survey was done from citywide perspective. That's why we got elements such as the fix and remodel the plunge, which was at the top 7.3%. These were individual answers people gave us. So when somebody had said swimming pool, we put all the swimming pools together. If somebody had said remodel the plunge, we kept those separate specifically because they were answers delivered to us. We can make the assumption as a design team and say, okay, logically, those two would go together. And yes, you could aggregate them. But when I present the community data, I preserve their voice and their answers where they sit.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I know that that's not part of the Parks and Recreation Park per se, but we have some other projects going on that concern those things. So thank you.
You bring up a really good point on that too, is there are other projects going on. We took the standpoint of trying to fit what we could from our citywide assessment into Recreation Park. So that said, if you had a component as part of our recommendations, a tennis and pickleball facility, and said, you know what, we're going to take this recommendation and put it over at this park, it would still fit in terms of the citywide survey information. And that way you can actually utilize the recommendations here from Recreation Park on a more broad citywide scale. So I want to keep that in mind too, as we presented those recommendations, that our task was to fit within the framework of Recreation Park. However, there's nothing to say you can't pull that recommendation and put it somewhere else.
Perfect. I think you did a great job. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Okay, who's next? Looks like Kelly's next.
Hey, thanks, Zach. This is really great information, and I really appreciate. I want to do a little shout out to the city staff who did, like Melissa, who was at the farmers market every week and was at Library Park during the concerts in the summer, and really trying to gather information on this, which I think is probably the most I've seen of this kind of an outreach, and I think that was really, really cool. That said, I'm sorry, I'm doing a PhD right now, and so I'm a little bit into data and how we do surveys. And so I have some just concerns about the survey that I noticed. So I took both of the online surveys. I don't believe I participated in the multimodal, but everything I was aware of, I participated in. And I had a couple of concerns. One was that the list of the facilities that was provided was not inclusive of all of the facilities that happen in the park. And the one that was the big miss from my perspective is soccer. There are more users of the soccer field in the park than there are most of the other facilities, I believe, in terms of number of kids. And so that was, and I appreciate that it did come up in the final recommendations, and I'm glad to see that, but it makes me worried about what else could have been missed. And then the question that, both Lee and Dave brought up, that question I answered, and I took it as a ranking question, not as a yes or no question. And so I know I personally answered with a rank as opposed to an evaluation of a yes or a no. And, this is part of a problem with surveys when you load too many questions into one question, is there's, then you might not get the most result or the most accurate result. And so I'm concerned that people didn't know what they were answering there and that it wasn't really a weighing in of a yes or no. I will say that, I think that the outcome that you got from the survey, or at least, the ideas that you guys have generated seem really interesting. This idea of a multi-purpose space. It seems a little counterintuitive that would raise a bunch of buildings, take them down and then put one up, and that would be cheaper than remodeling some of the buildings that are out there. But the other thing I wonder is, a Jocelyn Center and a teen center that are very specific to a particular demographic, nobody else is allowed to use those. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling question, right? Like, do you use the Jocelyn Center? Well, other than, I have been in the Jocelyn Center in my life because it's a rental space, but we're not supposed to be there. It's supposed to be this designated space for seniors. And the same with the teen center. And I'm glad that the girls weighed in before, because I did see it as kind of a boys' facility in the past. I know it's slowly changing, but I guess I'm just a little bit, I'm wondering, so if we did this multi-purpose building, we took down these other spaces, and I hope we open up more soccer fields when we do that. But we put everybody in the same building. Is it the goal to concentrate everybody that uses the park into the same place and have them mingling in the same space? Would you see teenagers wanting to be part of that multi-purpose space? And is that what we desire as a city? And I guess that's, because it's like, on the one hand, we're comparing pure numbers of who's used the facility against an audience that is the full universe, and yet the full universe is not supposed to use that facility. So it seems, again, like it's not really an apples to apples comparison. And I guess the only other final thing is that, when you're talking about 500 or some odd in your biggest survey respondents, and I understand statistical significance, but in a city the size of ours, is that really, like, how does that compare to normal outreach surveys? And do we really feel like the survey is giving us all of the information or the whole story? Like, I guess I wonder if any user groups were called in, if any focus group was done, or any interviews, just because, it seems like a small number and then when you start slicing it up demographically, like if I did the math right, it seems like on one of those surveys, you might have had 20 seniors weigh in if the demographics were split at 18% at 65 and over. So I'm just curious, like, can we really draw these kind of conclusions? And again, I'm not saying I disagree with the conclusions. It's making me a little nervous because I'm concerned about how the survey was conducted.
Oh, perfect, Kelly. Thank you very much for your questions there. And I'll try to answer them in the order that I've got them written here in my notes too. I'm a big fan of data-driven analysis too. I live in the data because at the end of the day, it's not my plan, it's the community's plan. So really, in order to make sure that it's as valid as possible, we have to use both qualitative and quantitative metrics. And that's also from the standpoint of anybody who wants to participate should be allowed to participate, which weaves in that qualitative analysis. So when we begin our surveys, it's with that quantitative data metric. The 300 surveys are the statistically valid that represent the community based on the demographics within a 5% margin of error. So that's our quantitative analysis that we took citywide snapshot level, and that's where we get our participation rates and run our data projections. However, we shift gears when we do the online surveys. And those online surveys are the qualitative analysis portion of it. So when we look at the qualitative analysis portion, it's anybody who wants to participate. It's pop-up events, it's people in the park. So every time we sent out those qualitative analysis, there were no restrictions on it, so anybody could participate. Further, we go into elements such as the feedback button online. So even on the website now, you can look at the feedback button and click on the feedback and provide open-ended paragraph narrative to the design team directly on what you would like to see. And that's done from the standpoint of no voice being left behind, is making sure everybody has equitable representation or the ability to participate more so within the project. So that's how we go through them. In terms of the numbers, 588 as the survey one was the amount of surveys we completed back on that. That is a tremendous number. And it's not a standalone number because it works in conjunction with all of the other surveys. But I will throw a shout out as well to Melissa and her staff for really making sure they were at the parks. They were at the pop-ups. The information was promoted. That is a tremendous number. And I will give El Segundo here the crown is in terms of single surveys. You've gotten the most out of the last year and a half of surveys that I've collected all across Southern California in one single survey. So that's a very high number and has a good amount of data that we've gotten in. So when we look at when I look at this data myself and I say, okay, is this valid of the community's voice? I am not going to be able to drag people out of their homes and get them to participate. A lot of portions of the community don't recreate. They will actually, they drive to other places to recreate in many scenarios. We can't get the entire community to participate. So what we found is those whom are participating are weighing in on the surveys. And at the end of the day, when we do our analysis with the both qualitative and quantitative measures, it comes to that qualitative end-all conclusion, which we develop our recommendation from. So I do see that number as being a real strong participation rate, more so when we look at the geographic distribution. It's not just one neighborhood, and it's just not one segment to the community, but it's representative of the entire community across the board geographically. So I take that into consideration as well too. I didn't see anything in our data points that would lend itself to a area where we need to shore up. We do watch it as we go through the data. If there is a gap within the community where we see no surveys coming in at, I'll look at those demographics, I'll look at those metrics. Are those community members who are more online survey people? Are they more telephone survey people? And we'll make sure to close that gap in the area. We didn't see any gaps come up through the survey participation process. In terms of some of the facilities, the facility mentions on the survey 2, I believe it was, we took the top facilities that were listed from the prior survey. So the information built on itself as we went through it. So not all, you're correct, not all facilities were listed in there for every program and court, ping pong table available, because there is quite a bit available at Recreation Park. So we did have to cut the list somewhere. So what we do is we build the list upon itself. So as we start to collect data and synthesize it, some of those top requested elements are put back on that list. However, we did hear, you mentioned earlier, soccer facilities. We did hear soccer facilities come up. It is in the recommendations, and it's actually one of those things we look at on a larger scale. We would do a sports organization analysis where we count the cleats on feet and say, this is how many soccer fields you need. And then we apply that across the entire city. That specific study was not part of this process, but can be done at a later date. With all the data that we've provided, the city can easily add that in down the road should they wish to do so. But we did hear soccer qualitatively come up, and it did make those recommendations. And then in terms of the demographic trend. I had a note here that you had a question on some of the demographics. I apologize. Your specific question on the demographics?
I wanted to know if, well, okay, I was talking about how the Jocelyn Center and
yes.
the Teen Center are only allowed to be frequented by those folks. So if you
Yes.
want to know that.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. So when we look at the centers themselves and how they're allowed to be frequented by each group, that we would be able to pull out data sets. And this is where I really like the data mining portion of it, because I can look at the answers of those who say, I never go to the senior center, but I don't go to the teen center because I'm not a teen or because I'm not a senior. I can actually start to see those trends in the response for the individual user, whether they are a senior and they're going to the senior center or not, and why, versus a teen and going to the teen center and not, and why. But what we see just throughout California and our other designs throughout other facilities and other communities is there's a movement towards more of a multi-generational recreation programming element where we have youth and seniors. Some of the very successful programming elements have come from tech time or tech tutors, where younger generations are meeting with the older generations and common programming elements where they're both cross multi-generational programming components where they start to mix together, not as an identified A senior or B teen, but more as a community. And that's just something we've seen out of our development in community centers across the last 10 years. More so, one of the most successful centers we had was actually a senior/community center, same building, different entrances. And what the community had done is we put all the money into one facility. It was bisected down the middle. The building was actually mirrored. So those that did have a preference for the community center or the teen center were able to participate in the same facility. And that's where we went with that kind of demographic analysis, is seeing just our own internal trend of a lot more people not individually identifying as a X group.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Julie.
Thank you. I went through this whole presentation, read through it in our packet, and then have, watched it again when you have presented here. And I have some notes. And first of all, I just had a question for Melissa. I'm just wanting to know, is this presentation and the scope of this work on the park redo actually coming in front of Rec Park Commission as a commission to make recommendations of what it is that we would like to see, or is this just a informational only for us? Because it seems to me lately like our role is being reduced with different recreation and park matters in the city. So that's a concern of mine if we're just looking at this as just a presentation only for our information. I did have some parents that approached me with concerns that they have heard that we, as in the Rec Park Commission, are getting rid of the teen center. I see that, the teen center has been around for a long, long time. And in fact, my grandfather is the one that brought Recreation Park to El Segundo from an idea he saw in Canada way back when he was on city council. But the teen center is important to a lot of kids. And I see that and I understand the multi-generational building. Maybe the separate entrances would work, but I see that, the teens don't want to go and hang out in a place where their parents might be, or where their grandparents might be. And the same thing for the seniors. The seniors may not want to be around kids. They may not want to be around the noise. Their building is quiet, and the teen center is noisy, and you got the skate park. And a lot of the cities that are doing these multi-generational buildings have a separate skate park. They have separate areas for the kids to go to. And right now, our facility is that teen center. And yeah, the buildings are old and they need to be upgraded, or we need the multi-generational. But I think we have to look at the groups of the teens and why they go there, and it's their own little private space, and the seniors and why they go there and it's their own private space. And maybe the multi-generational building will work for everybody and maybe it won't. But I think there's a concern there of wiping it out. And also when you talk about the plaza, when you got on professional assessments and you're talking about plaza and hardscape expansion, I'm one that I keep saying around the city that we keep getting rid of our green space. And I don't really want to see more concrete. I'd like to see more green space, even if it's field space, but more green space to relax and trees and things like that, instead of, you know, expanding the concrete footprint in the city, because we're losing more and more of our green space every time there's more construction and development going on in town. So that's always a concern of mine. But otherwise, the data and everything, I mean, I participated in the surveys, and I did find some of the questions kind of hard to answer because there was so much information in one question, and I didn't really know where to go with that. And I am one too that, you know, I don't necessarily use the teen center and I don't use the senior center. I do go there for different events, but I'm not a user. I will be eventually, I'll be a user of senior center, I guess. But I think they are important to those groups. And I like the idea of bringing seniors and teens together. And I've been saying that for quite a while at Park Vista, that they should come together and do some technology stuff. But I think that can be done separately. But also reiterating my concern that I don't know how much the commission is going to get a voice in this. So that's what I have to say tonight on that.
Okay, Melissa, did you want to take her first question?
Sure, absolutely. I do want to assure all of you that we want your input now and in the future, and we'll take it very seriously. I'm sure Zach is taking notes as well, because again, we have tried throughout this whole process to capture everybody's voice. And Rec and Park Commission, we know your expertise and your love for the park and the history that you have. So we want all of your input again tonight, but in the future as we have additional conversations. And those comments are going to be, and feelings, whatever you can tell us, will be shared with the council, both informally and in that presentation to council on November 16th. But we did receive the direction for them to report back to them, you know, about the analysis that we've done during this process, as well as the professional recommendations. So they will hear, you know, everything that you heard tonight, but your input is valuable. And although we're not asking for a formal recommendation related to the current state, there will be other opportunities to weigh in. I want to mention if the decision is made to move forward with the multi-generational center, there would be another really in-depth process similar to what happened with the plunge, in terms of creation of a conceptual design and lots of more community engagement and discussion about what that would really look like. As Zach kind of mentioned, there are models out there where it's more kind of flexible space. Maybe groups use it at different times of the day, but there's also models where there are these separate wings where it's geared toward, you know, older adults or teens in different parts of the building. None of those decisions have been made, and they wouldn't be made without a lot more outreach and conversation. So I hope that is helpful. Did that answer your question, Julie? Or
it did, and I would be interested in a field trip for the commission to see some of these multi-generational buildings at other cities. You know, I would be interested in visiting and seeing about that.
That's a great idea.
So there was some, Julie had some other questions. If you'd like to go ahead and answer those.
No, I don't think they needed to be answered. It's just a matter of those were some of my concerns.
And then Julie, just to reiterate what Melissa said, I am taking notes down as we go through this as much as I can here. And I did receive your comments very clearly, specifically on slide 24 with the hardscape expansion and preservation of green spaces. I made sure to make those notes down as we went through this. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dave, anything?
Sure. First of all, Zach, thank you so much for all the work that you and your team has done. These conversations tend to focus on the things that, you know, the few things that we had concerns about, right? Like most of it is fantastic. So I apologize if I or we come across as being critical. That's not our intent. So thank you so much for the work you've done. I do agree with Kelly on the way that the survey results showing that those spaces are not being used that much is not necessarily, I don't think, statistically valid or not statistically valid, or not representative of the community necessarily, because of the way those questions were asked and the restriction on. So I had that same idea in my head, and Kelly explained it better than I would have. So thank you, Kelly. That was a concern of mine. Another thought I had several times, and I'm not against a multi-generational facility if that through the process that ends up being the most cost effective, if it meets all the needs of seniors and teens and other people. I mean, that's a fine result potentially. But I don't think that the respondents to this survey, that piece of it, and their weighing in doesn't feel, going back to Lee's question, it doesn't feel, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like that should be one of the reasons why a multi-generational facility should be considered. Because I feel like they were led down a path, kind of, it felt. Again, I'm not against the idea. I just don't think hey, the respondents wanted this, didn't make sense to me. Another thought I had was, as far as multi-generational facilities, the clubhouse is a multi-generational facility. We have little preschool in there, and we have seniors who use it. We have teens who use it. So the idea that this is a brand new, thing isn't really the case. We have one, and maybe it could be used differently or redesigned differently. But that was one thing that crossed my mind several times, was that this isn't totally new idea. I do want to then jump to Julie's point. I had a lot of the same things written down as the three who spoke already, but I want to emphasize, it felt like at one point there was the idea of completely getting rid of the teen center in one of the slides. It was kind of like a raising of the teen center, and I just kind of my heart started pounding, because unless there's a teen center space designed in the new multi-generational facility that's better and cooler, then I could possibly fathom that in my mind. But without that, that place over time has saved kids' lives. So that one's a tough one to let go of.
And David, there's no getting rid of the teen center building. Just to clarify.
It felt like there was one slide in there that was I don't know how it was phrased, but it worried me that was a possibility.
It might have been my miscommunication on that. I apologize. It's moving the teen center programming over to a multi-generational facility. Teen center would remain.
Awesome. That was panic time for me. I say this because my next comment, because I'm a paddle tennis player. Okay. And every time paddle tennis comes up, I laugh. Because if you look at the days of the week and the times that the paddle tennis is reserved, we don't need more paddle tennis. So every time respondents, I think to myself, there is a group of 5 or 10 people who are answering these surveys and pushing something that is wrong, that is just flat out shouldn't be on here. And I'm one of those 5 or 10 people who play consistently, and I still think it's. So that I know you talked a lot about the qualitative side of this, and I just want to emphasize that there are pieces in that like that in here that feel very off to reality at the park. Another one is the tennis courts. I don't want to pick on paddle tennis, tennis courts is another one that, unless it's improvements in tennis courts, and that was the other thing. There were a couple slides that I wasn't sure if it was like, it listed tennis courts, and if it's improvements, and that's one thing, but if it was additional or something, then I would obviously say that's, even if 200 of those 300 people said that, they haven't looked at the tennis book and seen how many, reservations are available. So I just want to emphasize that I know there's a long way to go in this process and we're early on, but those are just a couple of things that just kind of, stuck out. There was a page that I was confused about, a slide that I was confused about. The one that talked about, it's titled Community Needs Summary, and it talked about apparent need and identified need. Do you remember that slide, Zach?
Yes, I do.
I didn't understand. Yeah, I didn't understand that one. Is an identified need like less than, or is this is frequent means like it was mentioned more often, and apparent is like was middle, and identified is the least often mentioned? Is that what it was?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
To be perfectly blunt, frequent needs were the highest element that we heard, and identified need was the lowest element.
Got it.
They're labeled differently today. I will say your paddle tennis came up on that identified low need. It only came up once during the process, and as I mentioned earlier too, is these categories are a way for us to say, okay, we heard everybody over here. They're in this category, or this category. Elements that are in the frequent need, we've heard several times over and over and over, multiple different areas. So it would come up as a frequent need. We did hear the tennis in the apparent need. So it came up in 2 of our modes, enough to be an apparent need. We also did take data from the statistically valid survey, and we looked at the participants, how many people play tennis, how many players does that equate to based on a per capita demand ratio, a peak day demand ratio, how many daylight hours you have, and started to quantify elements like that for some of the various elements in here. We did do that for tennis, but it only came up as an apparent need in this categorization.
So let me follow up on that. On that apparent need, is that means that they think there needs to be more tennis courts, or that means they just want them improved?
On this, it's a combination of both. There was a desire for improvement of the nets and courts, the paint on the facilities, but there was also a request too in terms of more facilities, which we considered in line with overlaying pickleball and tennis. If there is a new facility, multi-purposing it, so that way you can do both pickleball and tennis.
I guess my point, which I think I've made, but I'll say it one more time, is I think on those types of items, the pickleball and tennis and paddle tennis, I suggest that you analyze the actual usage, because that might be because it's not at perfectly convenient times for users. And then my second recommendation is when I think you're presenting to City Council, right? This same presentation.
The same presentation information.
Yeah, for frequent and apparent identity, for that page, I wanted to interrupt you in the middle. I just didn't want to be rude, but that would have helped me a lot if I'd known that really was just the number of times it was mentioned. You might want to change the titles or highlight that. And then my last comment. If something was highlighted, I'm on near the end, the third to last slide, which is the 10 to 15 years slide.
Right. Okay.
And the highlights means identified community voice. Can you explain what that meant again?
So if it was highlighted on there, it both came up from the community, but it's in line with our recommendations as well.
And so just curiously, sand beach volleyball court, does that mean it highlighted? Does that mean that more than 5 or 10 people, like what does that mean? Because that one was kind of was surprising to see too. Does that mean that one person said it, or 10 or 20 or?
For this one specifically, I can go back through and find the percentage of times it came up, but this one really is looking at way down the road in terms of 10 to 15 years. If this sport continues to be popular, it continues to climb, this would be the last thing we do out there on the site, because it's an infill project. This would start to address some of those needs. If we address everybody else's need on some of those frequent elements, then we're going to start hitting the other lists, and that's where this starts to come into play.
Got it. Makes sense. All right, thanks. Appreciate it very much. That's it, Bob.
Okay, thank you. Anyone have any other questions? Kelly, Julie? Okay. I agree with all your comments. Kelly, you nailed it. Well, just exactly what I was going to go with regarding the survey. I think, Zach, you guys did a great job getting with the information that you were given. Again, I'm just not sure that we have enough information. Not from you, from the community, but we can't force them to give it to us. So again, it was done great, and all the comments the commission made were exactly where I'm at. So with that, I have nothing else. So Melissa, anything else on this, or can we move on?
Yeah, just a huge thank you to Zachary and to all of you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your comments, and we will talk again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, and we're going to move to reports. Reports of subcommittees. Aquatic Subcommittee.
Want me to take that, Kelly? Okay. We've had a number of quick meetings, mostly about how we're going to continue with the plunge. Everyone seems to be moving the right direction, and look forward to getting this done in a timely manner. And that's about it.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move to Transportation Subcommittee. That's Kelly for sure.
We did not meet.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. And Youth Sports Council. Dave.
Yeah, we did meet.
Oh.
When was that, Bob? About a month ago?
Yes, we've already, but you were not at the last two meetings, and we did go over that.
You reported on that. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Okay, that was quick. Staff reports. Aricia, Recreation Superintendent.
Yes, good evening, commissioners. Just one reminder, well, I actually have two announcements that I would like to make. One reminder is about the Halloween Frolic. It's on Saturday, October 30th from 12 to 5. So I don't want anyone to forget about that. I do have more of an informational announcement. We've had some issues with bicycle riding through the park. There's actually been a couple of complaints that went to our risk department. And upon further review, risk found that we actually do have a muni code that prohibits bicycle riding in the park. So Melissa and I spoke further, and I spoke with recreation staff, and they agreed that we should actually be more proactive with not having as much bicycle riding in the park. They also mentioned in the complaint our lack of signage. So right now we're looking at that with some plans to have more signage in the park that's visible, and really encourage people to ride around the perimeter of the park, and also encourage our little ones to use the skate circle with their bikes if they're learning like tricks and learning how to ride. So we wanted the commission to at least have that information. So if you had any feedback or you heard someone complaining that we stopped them from riding their bike through the park, that's where it's coming from. And that's all I have. You have my report if you have any questions.
Anyone, any questions? Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Aricia. I have two questions about the farmers market. The first is, I noticed there's a list of how many vendors, and I've been noticing this the last couple of months. And I'm wondering if this is individual, separate, different vendors, or is this that there are 7 vegetable vendors? Is it because different ones come every time, or is it that the same people are being counted each time? And the reason I ask is I only usually ever see 1 or 2, so I'm curious as to these numbers.
Those are actually the same vendors. So if you're seeing 1 or 2, maybe at times they don't show up. and we try to keep them on our roster because we know they're still partnering with us. So if you would like me to tell you exactly how many times they showed up, I can get that data as well.
So you're saying that this means that there are 7 or whatever different ones?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a good answer. Okay, the second thing I wondered was, I know that we were hiring a new person for the farmer's market, and I know Sean's not here, but what's the status of that? Have we hired them? Are they in place?
Yes, we just hired him. He's actually has some field trips planned to visit 4 farmers markets. So we can go ahead and try to grow our farmers market here and get it back to where it was, and even better if we can get it better. That would be great. So yes, he just started. He's trying to get his wheels under him, and he's off and running.
Okay,
And
hang on one second. I think Elias wanted to pop in real quick.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a comment. The water tank behind me is going to be hopefully illuminated during Halloween. Just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Lee.
First, on the bike riding, I think I may have broken that little ordinance once or twice myself, and I would recommend maybe we get some bike racks on the perimeter, because as I go in to sign up for my rec park card, which is in the middle of the park, I'm looking, you're looking, what can I do with it and stuff like that. So just a side note, sorry for violating that ordinance code at one point or another. And the other one was I saw in a report that, and I witnessed it firsthand, is that the aquatic center has gone back to lawn course on Sundays and Mondays.
Yes.
And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it is long, very long. I went Monday and it was a very long lap and multiple times. So I think it's the right thing to do for somebody as old and decrepit as myself. It's very difficult, but it's very good for everyone else in that facility. And I commend you for getting out there. I know it's a lot of work to change it over. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Julie, go ahead. I see your hand. There, go.
I wonder if at this time, if I could ask Ryan a question, or should I do that during Melissa's report?
Go ahead.
Ryan's on here.
I think Ryan's there. There he is.
I am here, actually. I was just watching along today, but yeah.
Hey, Ryan, I have a question, because, and I think I forget where it came up, but about and it's information for me, but for Case as well. When you guys were talking about I think it was on the last meeting that I missed in September, you were talking about the lift service.
Yes.
For El Segundo residents and that concierge service. And I was wondering if that would be a service that Case could utilize for a few of our clients, because right now we do have a few clients that cannot get to the pantry and back home with their groceries, and we are paying for taxi vouchers. And so I was wondering if that is something that Case clients could get in on, and maybe I could get further information from you.
Yeah. What are the times of Case pickups? Because
Case is twice a month on Tuesdays, and it is from 4 to 6.
4 to 6. So that's something we would have to work out separately, because right now the program's just scheduled to run during the dial-a-ride times, Monday through Friday. So it'll end at 3. Okay. But that is something that we would have to work out in addition to. So right now the Lyft program is just going to run for the scheduled dial-ride times on Monday through Thursday, and then Saturdays from 9 to 1. Those were the traditional hours that we run the program.
Okay.
But there is some flexibility within there. And so maybe Kelly at the next transportation committee, that's something we can bring up and work through.
Okay, and I can get you further information on what our usage would possibly be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something we can totally work through. And yeah, with the concierge service, it's great. It's just like, calling in dial-a-ride. They would just give us a call and we'd book them a ride there and book them a ride back.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
And that's all I have for Aricia's part.
Okay, thank you. And Darcia, thank you. We will move to Christopher, Parks Maintenance Superintendent. Christopher.
Good evening, Commission. You have my report. Just one update on the ongoing negotiations with Southern California Edison regarding the easements for Washington Park, Independence Park, Constitution Park, and Freedom Park. They're still ongoing. The city has prepared a proposed mitigation plan to Edison, and I believe Elias is online here, and he's been part of that negotiations, and he could provide any update further from that. Other than that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, Julie, go ahead. You're muted.
Sorry, my concern on those parks, I've been driving by looking at them, just thinking how many trees we're gonna lose and what trees are going to be coming out. But also last night I was driving along Imperial and I was like, is this going to include the Imperial Strip also where the dog park is? And below, you know, Clutter's Bluff, we don't have the big trees there because of the airplane viewing, but there's utility poles running through that strip. So is that going to mean all of those trees as well?
That is a very good question. You know, we're talking about Memory Row and all those trees. It'd be devastating, absolutely devastating if this current tree policy is applied to the Imperial Strip, going from the dog park all the way through Memory Row. I don't have an answer for you.
Well, one of the things I can tell you is the reason Edison is enforcing the rules that they have had on the books, but they have recently decided to get serious with these parks is because they really are the owner of the parks. We just have a license to operate, and I don't know if that was made clear, or you guys know. You probably know, but the city has a license to operate these properties as park. The owner is Edison, and the issue came up when we wanted to renew the license. So they have a lot of leverage on this. I'm not so sure if they have leverage elsewhere. So the area where they do not own and they only have an easement for their transmission line, I don't believe they have the same rights, or they could be demanding the same manner that they have been demanding. So, or at least they haven't spoken yet. I doubt very seriously if they are going to come back and try to enforce the same rules along Imperial. So to that end, I'd like to clarify what Chris just said. We are working with the Edison. We had a big meeting with their high echelon leaders and city manager's office. And what we decided to do, and they agreed, was to develop a plan of action. The plan of action would constitute to hire a landscape architect that would look at these parks. They look at what Edison wants to accomplish. At the meantime, we would have to be part of that and see what kind of effect what Edison wants to do would have on the vegetation. And then based on that, there would be a mitigation plan and a revised irrigation system that would make Edison to plant any removed tree caliper for caliper. In other words, if they remove a 12-inch tree, they have to install 6 inches of 2-inch caliper, if that makes sense. And that plan of action would have to be would have to be approved by both parties, and then they would also participate in the cost of the irrigation system adjustment and all of that. but they would have to pick up the cost and or bring those trees to plant if that makes sense. So that's what we're working on. So I drafted an email and I sent it to them on Sunday. They received it, and this morning I talked to them. They are looking at that. Their top dog was out the early part of this week. They're going to get back with us, and that's what we're going to push through. In other words, we may end up having to remove some trees, and because they own the property, but we are trying very hard to make them to mitigate any tree they remove, and we're also trying to force them not to remove any tree within 25-foot radius of a wooden pole if that's what they want to do. We're trying to see if they could remove trees if they have to within 10 feet. So there's a lot of going back and forth, but I can assure the committee that we'll be very, very hard on them, and we'll try to preserve every single tree and I'm going to push as hard as we can, and I can assure you that it'll be a big battle for them try to remove those trees. But I'm gonna let you know they're gonna remove some. We're gonna keep those to minimum, and we're gonna make them to mitigate for those trees. But anyway, more is forthcoming, and I'd be glad to share as we go forward with this plan of action.
Elias, is this something that the city of El Segundo can align with other cities to where we become a bigger voice and a bigger group than just El Segundo going against Edison? Manhattan Beach is going to have the same problem, and Hermosa and Redondo, and all these cities are going to have the same problem.
Yes.
Why not come together as a united front?
Well, I've dealt with Edison in my past previous job when I was in Rancho, and I know some of them. There are times that if we go one-to-one with a definite and very solid recommendation and or desire, they are more receptive than if we try to get other cities, because that might backfire. So we have that as an option, but we are using exhaust every effort that we have, and Scott and myself, the city manager and myself, we are talking at the very, very high elevation with them, and so far they have been receptive. But as I said, I just sent that email on Sunday. We'll see how it goes. So the cost of a landscape architect to look at that and review and come up with a mitigation plan, we're talking about maybe $20,000-$30,000. If they pay half of that, that's really a good faith on their part. The more significant one is, and we're not going to let them get away with that. They have to place those trees that are removed caliper for caliper, and that's what I did in Rancho Palos Verdes, and I was able to get them to do that. It needs a little pushing, but if the push is come with the right attitude to the right person, I think we stand a very good chance in getting that.
Okay, Elias, thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else for Christopher? Okay, Lee, go ahead.
Just real quick, something on a lighter note. During the survey that we just went through, the multimodal survey, I just saw real quick that, the Parks and Recreation activities ended up getting a 76% approval rating, which is very good. The Parks Facilities got an 82% rating, and Christopher, you are winning with 83% approval rating. Congratulations. I thought that was a little takeaway that I thought was worth commenting on. So good job and keep it up.
Thank you. I enjoyed that too.
I had something else for Christopher too.
I see you. Go ahead.
Christopher, it was called out on Facebook. Somebody asked about the railing, and I said that I would ask about it in the commission meeting. The railing that runs up the pathway along the south side of the Joslin Center is very wonky, and there's some concerns with people that it's not stable. So I said that I would bring that up.
We repaired that last week.
Okay, thank you.
Julie, if you hear something that's a safety thing, you don't have to wait for the meeting. Call him directly. Christopher will definitely take your call. Don't want to waste time on a safety. Okay, with that, Christopher, thank you. And I don't see any other hands. Melissa, Director's report.
Thank you. Just a few items to highlight tonight. One other detail related to the Dial-A-Ride and Dr. Dial-A-Ride pilot program. The scheduled implementation date target is November 1st, and registration for that program will be via the Jocelyn Center. So that's really exciting news that it's almost ready. In addition to that, the Teen Advisory Committee applications are available now for 2022, and applications will be due on November 9th by 5 p.m. That committee is designed for 7th to 12th graders interested in advising about teen programs and services and events. So they recently hosted a laser tag event that attracted over 100 teens, which is really wonderful. And I want to compliment and thank Devin Zamora and Rachel Cummings for the great work that they're doing with that particular group. Hopefully you also saw in the report that the Community Services Department is actively recruiting additional recreation leaders and camp counselors, swim instructors, and lifeguards. So we ask for your help in helping to share those opportunities as widely as possible, and to encourage candidates to either reach out to Recreation Supervisor Rachel Cummings, Aquatic Supervisor Linnea Palmer, or the city's Human Resources Department for more information. So we're trying to build back our team. We do have still quite a few vacancies that occurred during the pandemic. So we would love your help kind of spreading the word and that we are looking to hire more people at this time. And happy to answer any questions if you have them for me.
Let me look around the room here. I'm seeing none. Melissa, thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll move to commissioner comments. Commissioner Watson, Kelly.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to do a shout out to Sean Green and thank him for helping out with the fair formerly on Richmond Street, but now on Main Street that happened this past week. He did a great job. It was his first time in the role of kind of doing a huge event of that magnitude, and we worked our way through it, and he was just super responsive and really great. So I wish he was here because I wanted to give him that shout out. And then the only second thing I wanted to talk about was I met with a woman who had her dog off leash in Rec Park, and so I was curious, and I went over and said it was really early in the morning, and I was setting up the soccer field, and I said, "Hey, what's going on?" And she told me something interesting that I just wanted to share. And, again, it's a sample set of one, so it is not a statistically significant number. However, she mentioned that the resistance to using the dog park was not that it was too far and that Rec Park was closer, but rather that there are aggressive dogs and aggressive people that use the dog park, and she didn't feel like it was a safe place for people to bring dogs. So I wanted to bring that up because I thought, this is a room full of smart people, but maybe we can sort of noodle on that and think about how we could alleviate that concern. And certainly before we consider converting any more space in the city to dog parks, because if it is the sentiment that people are not going to use them, that's concerning. I will note that about a half an hour later, as I was coaching soccer on that field, I did step in some dog dung. So it remains a problem in our park, and I know it's one, Bob, that you also have expressed frustration about. But anyhow, I just thought it was an interesting perspective. I wanted to share it, and maybe we can just sort of think about that and how we can maybe address some of the concerns about the users of the park and why people wouldn't use the dog park.
Kelly, thank you. You nailed it again. Thank you. Commissioner Stolnak, Julie.
The only comment I have is it just seems, and it's nice that our park activities and things are ramping up again, and with more and more involvement and more things happening and people getting out, and there was a great turnout at the fair. I went to that and it was really nice. You know, with Halloween coming up and the tree lighting and all those things, so it's nice to see that things are starting to ramp up again for rec park activities. And I just think that everybody in our Parks Department and city are doing a great job. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lubes, Dave.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to what Lee said, because I don't think we can talk about these enough. I think this is something to be incredibly proud of. It's a city that's dedicated to recreation, and that means people, but it's also city staff, not just recreation department, but other people at the city level. It's all the recreation people. It's full-time, it's part-time, it's swim people, it's parks, trees, it's paths, it's hundreds of people that get to that. Now, I don't know what, I wish Zach, I wish Zach could have compared this to other cities, because of course, I don't know this to be true, but there's no way that other cities are getting marks like this. And I think that this is something to be incredibly proud of for everyone that's involved in recreation. Melissa, please, congratulations to you, and please pass that on to as many people as possible. This is my favorite thing that happened tonight right here. That's all.
Dave, thank you. Vice Chairperson Davis, Lee.
Yes, sir. Where to start? The needs assessment, I think, is really, really interesting. You know, I think Julie hit on something that kind of rang true with me. She talked about the railing. You know, the Johnson Center is a great senior center. I just couldn't figure out why they put it next to the largest incline or hill in the entire park. So I can understand maybe moving the seniors over to, maybe Pine Street, where it's a level walk in, walk out. And I think it's real exciting that everything that's going on, that we can take a real good look and understand exactly what's needed, what has been done, and what can be done, and how everybody wants to do it. So I think that's real exciting. It's as exciting as seeing as how far we're getting along with the plunge after doing after we've done a regional pool, on the east side of town. Everything seems to be going in a very good, at a very good pace. And I'm just very proud to be a part of it. And I'm very proud to be working with Elias, Melissa, and all of you, and especially Christopher, because he has the highest rating, of everyone. So with that being said, thank you very much. And that's all I got.
You guys hit it all. I mean, I don't even have to say anything. Go through 4 people. I don't need to repeat anything other than staff. Thank you very much for everything that you do. And commission, great responses to the needs assessment. And so thank you. And with that, we are seeing nothing else. We will adjourn to the next regular meeting on Wednesday, November 17th, 2021 at 6 p.m. Thank you, everyone.